Really excited to introduce our next presenter, Mika Nicola. We actually met, what was that, 2018. She and her husband had just lost a 3-year-old son, Max, to drowning out in Zilla, and walking through that with them and watching the community rally around it was very, very powerful. She's now got a private practice out in Zilla, and obviously counsels from her own experience dealing with the realities of loss. Like that, she calls Heights her church home, and again, just really excited for her to share with us this morning. So welcome to the platform, Mika Nicola.
I'm good. Okay. Hello. So what's great is that I'm going to get us back on track time-wise because the previous presenters completely covered like genetics, medication, coping skills, and so now I just have to talk a little bit about depression. Oh, that's great. Before I get going with this presentation, something that I want to say is that how our mental health manifests, right? These symptoms manifest, can look very different person to person. While there's definitely some overlap, and that's how we know what's going on, the impact of these symptoms on our lives can look pretty different. And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of times in practice, I'll have someone come in, regardless of if it's depression or trauma, and they'll say something like, I feel like what other people are going through is so much worse than what I'm going through. Or on the other hand, they'll say, I feel like what I'm going through is so much worse. I feel like something's so wrong with me. And then I get to validate them and in both of these cases, tell these people that what they're going through is valid and it's real. So I'm going to start by sharing a story. I'm not going to, not necessarily a trauma story, but way before that, sort of the origin story of why I became a therapist and why I even get to stand up here and talk to you guys. And it's because of depression. Yay. So when I was 22 years old, I had my first experience with a major depressive disorder. And at that time, I didn't really have a frame of reference for what was going on with me and what I was feeling. I was born and raised in Wapato, Washington, in the 80s and 90s, and not just because of scarce resources, but because of the time, mental health wasn't something that was really talked about with us. I didn't know what to look for in a depressive episode or anxiety, and as far as therapy went, my idea of therapy was like, you're laying on a couch. Everything I saw on TV and in movies, like you're laying on a couch and there's a guy in a leather chair telling you about your childhood, interpreting it for you. And I definitely didn't think that I qualified for that. And so not only that, but there's also this other piece where I grew up in the church. I grew up in the super tight-knit family, first-generation Filipino, very much involved in the church. And so mental health wasn't talked about there either. So here I am at 22, and the way that I can explain it is I felt like I was being pulled away from myself. I felt like I was becoming less and less like myself. I started doing less. I started slowly engaging less in my relationships and my friendships, and those really suffered. I stopped showing up for my friends, and I started really not taking care of myself. And in my brain, what I thought the formula is, I really need to pray about this. I really need to exercise more. I really need to, revamp my life, or we'll talk about impulsivity in just a minute. But none of those things were working. These formulas that I believed would pull me out of whatever I was going through weren't working. And then I had a shame story growing, because then I thought, okay, something is seriously wrong with me. There's some kind of sin inside of me that I need forgiveness from or deliverance from. And so thinking that, I definitely wasn't going to tell anybody about it until I worked it out. Then I'd come back and share a testimony or something. But I had so much shame and so much embarrassment, so much worry that I was going to burden people or worry my family. So I started to withdraw more and more. And then I decided what I needed was a fresh start. I need to move to Southern California. I need to live close to the beach where I will learn to surf. I'll make a bunch of new friends. And then when I've pulled it all together, I'll move back and all will be well. Well, probably not surprisingly to you, but surprisingly to me, my depressive episode followed me there. And now I was just alone. I was alone in this new place. Something that I like about myself is that I have a pretty easygoing nature. And so it hasn't been hard for me in the past to make friends. And I was really relying on that. But I didn't feel like going to the beach. I didn't feel like cultivating new friendships. And after about a year, I was at rock bottom, and I was terrified because I had been alone in this, and I had pulled away from people who knew me. And I'm sitting on the floor of my apartment, and I call my oldest brother, who has always been an emotionally safe person to me, but who I have not been talking to about what's been going on. And I tell him, I'm not okay, and I'm really scared. And so I'm calling, and I have all this shame and embarrassment, and he responds to me with, if I leave right now, I can be there in 18 hours. And I didn't need him to come, but just knowing, that here I was with this thing that was so embarrassing to me, and it was met with empathy, it was like this spell broke, And I thought for the first time, maybe I can get help. And I was willing to do something different than what I had been doing. So in a nutshell, I got in touch with a therapist, a doctor, in my case, a dietitian, and over time started to come back to myself, started asking other people to pray for me, just to not be alone in this. And, when I had kind of come out of that and was reflecting on my support system and my treatment team, I was so impacted by how profound it was that I decided I want to do that. I want to be a part of someone else's treatment team. And that's what I get to do. I get to come alongside people who are in the darkest walks of their life. And I get to sit in the dark with them, and I get to remind them who they are. I get to remind them who they're not. And then we get to come up with plans, small ways for them to get out, right? And I love that part of my job, and I'm so honored that I get to do it. So then I was asked to come here and present, and I thought, I really want to say yes to this. I want to be part of this community and healing in this community, but the thought of public speaking also makes me physically ill. But I said yes, and I'm doing it. I'm building resiliency right now. But thank you. If you could just keep being my hype woman. But saying yes, not just because I felt called to do this and saying yes to my community, but this is also part of my redemption song. This is also for, the 22-year-old version of me who had so much shame and was so embarrassed and would never have told this story, right? Would have died with it. It's for her, I wish I could go back and tell her, girl, just hold on. You can't imagine what's coming, And now here I am in front of you guys, and it's incredible. So thank you for holding space for me and for my story. Oh, you guys are great. I'm not done. Now we're gonna talk about depression, and I'm not a public speaker, so I don't know how to transition. Okay, so let's start with what is depression? Am I sad or am I depressed? Oh my gosh. There we go. So everyone experiences sadness and feeling low. In fact, feeling sad is a very healthy response to things that are distressing, right? When we're talking about sadness, we're talking about these emotions that can sort of run their course, and after a couple of days, you might feel better, or it lifts. That doesn't mean you can't be reminded of the sad thing and be sad again. But when we're talking about depression, it's a persistent, it doesn't let up. It affects us so much that even doing basic daily tasks become very difficult. Like turning a page. Oh, okay. So this is sort of the criteria that we use to diagnose depression, and so I'll quickly go over it. Persistent low mood or feelings of despair. When we're talking about despair, despair is the absence of hope. Despair is today is so bad, and I can't imagine the days after today being any better, right? Low mood doesn't just mean sadness. I think when we think of depression, we think of sort of like an Eeyore vibe, right? It can also look like irritability, anger outbursts, agitation, having a level 8 response to a level 2 situation, right? So something that I tell my clients is, depression is kind of like you're on simmer, right? And no one can see that you're on simmer, but it just takes one click of the heat and you will boil over, right? And then there's a lot of shame about that and a lot of confusion maybe in your relationships about why you're reacting the way you're reacting, and then you feeling crazy, which doesn't help with depressive episodes. And then we have a loss of interest or pleasure. What we're talking about is things that you used to enjoy or that used to rejuvenate you, you have no interest in doing them anymore. Or when you try to do them, you cannot access that joy and happiness. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about shame. Again, this can fuel shame. Let's say I'm playing with my kids. I'm, watching them do amazing and fun things, but I just can't access the happiness and joy. I can have a lot of shame about that as a parent, right? This can also include things like, this can also impact things like our sexual health. So a crash in a libido, right? Or problems with sexual performance, which again can impact our sense of self, our sense of worth, but also our relationships. Feelings of guilt or low self-worth, which we just kind of talked about. I like to talk to my clients a lot about value systems. A value system it's not just the things that are important to us, but it's how we live our lives, right? So for me, I had talked about like disengaging from relationships. Connection is one of my values. I want to connect and show up for people. When I wasn't doing that, my quality of life went down and my shame grew, right? Because I wasn't living out of that value system. I know Jeff kind of talked about like guilt versus shame. Guilt, there's a resolution for guilt. If I feel guilty, I am prompted, there's a prompt in me to want to make things right? With persistent feelings of guilt for being depressed, it's kind of unjustified. So I feel like I want to make things right, but what is there to make right or resolve, right? And then there's shame. Something is wrong with me. Disturbed sleep. This doesn't just mean you can't sleep, although it can mean you can't fall asleep because you're just ruminating, but also getting terrible sleep, waking up many times during the night, getting a night of sleep but not feeling rested, or sleeping way more than usual, so taking lots of naps during the day, not being able to get out of bed in the morning. Appetite changes. Again, this could be your appetite ramps up, or that your appetite is completely killed, right? Appetite changes can also look like using food to get a dopamine hit, right? To just feel better in the short term. Low energy, again, this is like that fatigue, and it's so heavy. When we talk about the depression weight, it really does feel like there's this wet blanket on us, and it makes everything harder to do. So the things, again, that maybe didn't require that much from you are now like you're completely spent. Poor concentration. I think that we could also tie in some impulsivity here. But this is where my attention can't be held. I'm having a really hard time focusing on things, making decisions, and so then I might become impulsive, or might be making impulsive decisions because I just want to feel better. And then thoughts that one might be better off dead. So this isn't always, I want to kill myself. This is also, I just wish I wouldn't wake up, right? When we are in distress, as part of the human condition, is we do not like being in distress. And so our brain, which produces about 70,000 thoughts a day, many of which we don't pay attention to, are trying to problem solve. How can I not feel this way anymore? We don't want to feel like this. And one of the thoughts that it will produce is to die, right? There's so much shame about this, and something that I'll say to clients again, and to myself, right, is that this is not part of someone's character, having these kind of thoughts. This is part of the human experience in a depressive episode, right? If I'm overwhelmed at home, this is different, but if I'm overwhelmed at home with my kids, working, being married, one of the thoughts that my brain might produce is that I could get in my car, go to Southern California for a fresh start. That doesn't mean I'm gonna do it. That doesn't align with my value system. It's just a thought that is an idea that my brain is throwing out. All right, I thought it was really important to talk about what to look for in kids. Again, depression in kids, no interest in fun things. So this would look like declining invitations to go do fun things, not being interested in sports or clubs or extracurriculars that they used to be. If you have a kid who is really into comic books and things like that, them kind of being, resigned or whatever, that's definitely a warning sign. Isolating, staying in their rooms, keeping away from family and friends. I put an increase in phone usage, again, just trying to escape life, escape how they feel. This kind of goes with sleeping changes. I'll have kids and adults have said, I just try to sleep most of the day because I just don't want to be awake. I just don't want to be here for it. Appetite changes, same as adults. You might see them eating more or less, going into their rooms and eating, refusing to be with the family while they eat. Irritability, low mood, and anger outbursts. When I was a child and family therapist, kids would come in for behavior problems. And what a lot of teachers and parents were coming in and saying is they just don't listen, or their emotions are out of control. We need a behavioral approach here. But underneath this, right, is a kid who feels terrible about themselves, or has experienced trauma and is completely unresolved, or is experiencing trauma. And the importance of advocating for these kids, right? If you're a kid, you don't have very much power and control over the circumstances in your life. You have to have adults who will advocate for you, who will believe you when you say that these things are the underlying issues. Poor concentration, so grades declining. Again, kids coming in because, which rightfully so, but parents are really concerned about grades and things like that. I want to know, why is this happening? Why is there this sudden shift? And then more negative statements about themselves or life in general. I have a middle schooler. They can be really ornery, right? And be I don't know. Nothing impresses them. But this would be persistent and maybe different or an increase than what is the norm for them. Please. Mark.
It's just one finger.
Okay, one finger, okay. So, like I said, I don't think this is something that I need to necessarily repeat very quickly. What causes depression? We don't know exactly, but we do know that there are definitely contributing factors. Genetics, as Dr. Jans talked about, brain chemistry as well. In a nutshell, depression is there's a lot of miscommunication in our brains, a lot of our brain is having a really hard time managing and processing emotion. Circumstances, this would be some of the common circumstances that I hear about or stressful things are like being in a job that is completely soul-sucking, being in a job where you feel isolated or you don't feel like there's any camaraderie or teamwork, being in relationships you feel stuck in that you can't get out of. Again, for kids, a lot of times it was parental conflict. How much power and control do they have over that? And who can they talk to about that? If there's a lot of conflict in the home between parents, kids don't often feel like they can talk to their parents about it. Kids don't want to make things worse. Trauma. As a trauma-informed therapist, I am always asking in intakes if someone has a trauma history, because trauma will absolutely come with depression, which makes sense. I think the statistic is something like 75% of people who qualify for a PTSD diagnosis will also meet criteria for depression, for major depressive disorder. Lifestyle, this would be something like you never get outside, you work 80 hours a week and you don't sleep, you hardly eat, these sorts of things. And then addiction. When people are in active addiction, they're not usually, can I say ever, a version of themselves that they want to be. Thank you. So what doesn't help? These are some slippery slopes. I love that Jeff talked about this. Ignoring or trying to push down your feelings of distress. So there's a difference between letting something go and pushing something down. When you let something go, you don't have a lot of conflict about it, right? It makes you feel lighter and better. Whereas trying to push something down, that's avoidance. And you can't fool yourself because you'll feel it build up over time, every time you don't say something when something's bothering you or is colliding with your value system. And then it will wait for you in the form of a major depressive episode where you have to pay attention to it, right? Consuming media. This isn't just social media. This could also be podcasts, news segments. Actually, I heard this from a podcast, so this is a good thing. But I heard, and it makes a lot of sense, that the mind cannot help but believe something that it is repeatedly fed. And I think about, especially with kids, when they're in their rooms, on their phone, a lot of times they're not looking for what will help them feel better. They're wanting to be validated, right? And so they're going to read more depressing things, and it's going to validate their existence in that way, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Same thing with adults. The other thing I want to say about this is everything that you consume, right, media, your nervous system consumes. So if I am watching or listening to something that is distressing to me, I'm not just thinking, wow, that was distressing. I am feeling distressed, right? It is impacting me and my body. Okay, isolation, suffering alone, obviously it does not help. When you are all alone with your thoughts, this is where shame gets to grow. Isolation in depressive episodes always makes shame worse, and those shame stories we tell ourselves. We're not getting any outside information for someone to say, hey, I see you, I think you need help, right? All right, shaming kind of goes along with that. There's something wrong with me innately. I'm broken. I think the other thing here is that people think that if they shame themselves, they'll whip themselves into action, right? And I think about if we embodied that voice that was shaming you all the time, would it make you want to be effective and productive and a version of yourself that you want to be? No, it leads to resignation. Who cares? What does it matter anyway? And if we embodied that voice was just criticizing you all the time, you'd want to throat punch it, right? That does not feel good. Okay, and then the being strong, and again, I love that this was touched on. Being strong is just think positively. Choose happiness. If we could choose happiness, I wouldn't have a job, right? It would be so easy. This is also the, buck up, buttercup. That might work for some things, But when there is all of these things contributing to a depressive episode, this just leads to suffering alone and not wanting to tell anybody because we feel weak, right? Adding to the shame story. Okay, so what does help? Where can we start? Confiding in a loved one, or I would just say an emotionally safe person, right? I want to say that I know, when I shared my story and I talked about calling my brother, I know that not everybody has that, and I want to validate that. An emotionally safe person could be somebody, if I'm talking to kids, like a teacher. It could be a therapist that you look up on Psychology Today, and you just, if you don't have anybody, and then you call me, and then we're just like a 2-person wolf pack, and then I'll help you grow your community. But again, just to not be alone in it, just for someone to say, like, I believe you when you say you are suffering, when you are in pain. What we know, too, is that in order for change to happen, validation is so important. And validation is just, again, I believe you that this is your experience. Get a treatment team. So this would include, I think therapy could help everybody, but a therapist. A therapist isn't just somebody that you're going to go and just talk to, although that's a big part of it. Therapy is also where we get to teach people how to regulate their emotions, right? And regulating emotions doesn't mean we just help you change how you feel, but we kind of help you feel how you feel, right? In a way that's effective. Sort of like we're witnesses to your experience, right? And we're not going to judge you or shame you for it. It's also a place that we get vocabulary to express what's going on with us. And then to help us change our relationships with our thoughts. All right, doctor, again, and Dr. Jantz talked about this, but going to a medical professional to figure out, are there underlying causes for why I feel this way? Hypothyroidism is, I would say, like a huge one. And deficiencies, and even food allergies or food sensitivities. So I just recently learned, unfortunately, that I'm sensitive to gluten. And even though I try to go back to it again and again, it absolutely affects my mood. That inflammation in my body affects not just how I feel physically, but emotionally. A nutritionist, again, just some more support to figure out what kind of lifestyle stuff I can change. And then natural supports. This doesn't just mean friends and family. This could be the person that you walk with during your lunch break. This could be an online book club, a Bible study, your pastor. Just the people who you haven't hired to support you. Addressing contributing factors. So I think I maybe talk about this in the next one, but trauma therapy. If I have someone who comes in for depression, but they screen, they're clinically significant also for PTSD, I want to treat the trauma first and see if it helps resolve some of those depressive symptoms. And then when you are so low, stick to the basics. So if I have a client who comes in and she tells me, Rebecca, I haven't showered in 2 weeks, and I haven't brushed my teeth, and I don't know how long. I've been calling into work, and the only reason I came today is because of your no-show policy. I am so impressed by that, because it is so much harder to come to a therapy session when you absolutely don't feel like it. It's so much easier to come when you feel put together, when things are going a little bit better, when you're ready to tackle something, right? This kind of also goes with the being strong thing. To me, that's strength. That's where the work is, right? This person showed up on telehealth. I've seen many people in bathrobes. I'm just glad they signed on, okay? So when I say when you're so low, stick to the basics, what I'm talking about, and again, Dr. Jantz talked about this maybe last night, but I'll say to that person who's in my office, like, where can we start today? How can I help you today? Do we need to make a plan for maybe let's just shower once a week? Let's set a timer for 30 seconds and just swirl some toothpaste in there. Start with things that are really feasible. It's so much easier to start on very small things and build over time than when we're so flooded and thinking, I need to revamp my lifestyle to get trauma therapy going, address this addiction. If we can just start small and start with the basics, we can build on that. Sometimes in sessions, I'll have clients do this, and I won't have them brush their teeth in session because they don't bring toothbrushes, but it might be something like, I've been putting off calling my prescription in. That feels so overwhelming, and I feel paralyzed. Like, okay, let's get out your phone. Let's do it right now together. I'll sit with you while you do it. I need to return this text that I haven't done yet, and it feels like a dread cloud on me. Okay, let's do it, right? I haven't been outside except to walk to my car to come here. Okay, let's go for a little walk right now. I'll do it with you. I'll do it alongside of you as much as I can without doing it for you. Okay? Okay. So, oh my gosh, we're almost to the end. Okay, so how common is depression? 1 in 6 Americans will experience a major depressive episode in their lives. It happens enough that we can say it's common, right? Like Dr. Jant said, anxiety and then depression. Depression impacts people of all races, cultural groups, ages, and religions. Nobody is exempt, right? I'm not saying that depression is part of the human experience necessarily, but it's something that many humans in this human condition experience. And I think statistics are so important because it helps us realize we're not alone. Again, it kind of helps dismantle the shame story that we have, that I'm the only one who's experiencing this. Women are nearly twice as likely as men to experience depression. And also anxiety, I learned today from Dr. Jantz. What we know about people who come in for help is that men will come in they'll usually go see their doctor for physical ailments, right? So like headaches, stomach aches, digestive stuff, that's not resolving with treatment. And then the doctor refers them to me for depression. Whereas women are more likely to go in because of what's happening with their moods and their emotions and not feeling themselves in that way. Before I am going to start talking about suicide a little bit, and so I just want to say that right now, like Jess said, if you need to take care of yourself or if this is triggering for you. So depression and suicide. 2/3 of those who commit suicide struggle with depression. I think about when somebody is in this state of mind and they are completely off the radar, and they are not in touch with anybody, the hopelessness and the despair just gets to grow, and they have to get out of it, And that's not selfish, that's desperate. Of those diagnosed with depression, 1% of women and 7% of men will commit suicide. When I'm assessing for safety, again, we talked a little bit about impulsivity and wanting to feel better. I will also want to know what people have access to in their homes. Because there are some impulsive decisions that you can come back from, and there's some that you can't, right? And so I'm going to ask, for example, do you have firearms in your home? That's not an impulsive decision that someone can come back from. The risk of suicide is about 20 times greater among those diagnosed with depression compared to those without major depression. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death for 15 to 19-year-olds, and I think Dr. Jantz talked about how it's even younger. It's like 10-year-olds, babies. Reports of suicide attempts among college students have increased from 0.7% to 1.8% since 2013. This does not even take into account the pandemic. Again, one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because, not that I don't think people take suicide seriously, but depressive symptoms and how they can just explode and blow up when someone is all alone in it. All right. So warning signs of suicide. So if you are experiencing this, or you are noticing these things in someone else, please get help. making plans or researching ways to die. So this isn't just I'm having this thought. Now it's I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I'm making a plan, and now I'm gathering. There's a behavioral component where I'm actually trying to get this plan in motion. Withdrawing from friends, saying goodbye, giving away important items, or making a will. So sometimes what we'll see, not all the time, but we might even see a lift in someone's mood for a little bit, and then they'll be giving their stuff away. And part of that is that it's because they've already made the decision, and they're already making a plan. And they're experiencing a little bit of relief because they don't have to feel this way much longer. So if you're seeing that in someone, just be curious, just ask. Taking dangerous risks such as driving extremely fast. So this is kind of the thing, it's like, I don't care if I die. Displaying extreme mood swings, eating or sleeping more or less, and then obviously using more drugs and alcohol. They just don't want to feel the way they feel. All right, and then here's some resources. Just because I just talked about suicide, I want to say this is a really great thing that has just been implemented, but call or texting 988, it's like 911. You can, from any phone, call and you'll get in touch with the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also chat with them online or text. Here's some resources. Psychology Today, you can find clinicians who accept your insurance, who specifically work with whatever you're dealing with. If you prefer to only do telehealth, you can also search for clinicians that way. And then here's a website you can go on. Basically, if you Google what is depression, immediately the government will send you to these websites. And you can get more information on symptoms and options for treatment. So I did it, that was it. But I want to say again that whatever you're going through, your pain, your suffering, your experience, whatever degree it is, it's valid and it's real, and you don't have to go through it alone. And I am so hopeful, maybe for some of you, you came here and it was everything you had to show up here. I'm hopeful that maybe this could be the beginning of you getting in touch with somebody. And so, thank you for your time.